In Parabola 101, we introduced the fundamentals of troubleshooting workflows. As an advanced builder, it's worth you knowing all the different options that exist both within specific steps, but also in run logs and other places across the app so that you can debug and troubleshoot issues as quickly as possible. The goal of this lesson is for you to understand all the different tools that are in your tool belt so that you can unblock your own flows and teammates' flows as quickly as possible.
Now that we are in the canvas, you can see I have one error on my email step at the very end. If I come into my run log, I'm going to be able to see that we had a partially failed run, and within that error message at the bottom, you'll always be able to see any errors that occurred when that last run went through. You can either directly click the View Error button to jump into that step, or always double click on any steps that have that pink arrow there. Now, in most cases, the error message you see here should be enough to point you to the direction of what actually needs to solve. But if that still leaves you in a place where it's unclear exactly what you need to do, I would highly recommend you ask Parabola as option A when you're trying to troubleshoot a workflow. In this example, I said explain the error in this workflow and how I can fix it. Parabola took a second, looked at all of the steps in the flow, and then told me that the error was in my email step, and before I undid its change, it actually went in and updated the email step, putting in an email to resolve this issue and make the flow work again. One thing to not discount is just how capable Parabola is going to be to not only troubleshoot actual errors in your flow, but also to do ad hoc data analysis as you build. So for instance, if you're building and you're wondering, hey, these steps are working, but how did these records actually make it to this step? Why are these transformations happening the way they do? Do I have duplicates? Are there multiple values of something, or are we missing any values? There are a couple different ways that you can answer these questions, but option A should be jumping into that step and just asking Parabola to look at the data and see what it can find. If you're still coming up empty or you still have additional questions after you go down that route, another approach that I'll use from time to time is creating a new branch in our workflow dedicated to data analysis. Here's an example of creating a branch to not only analyze the data throughout our flow, but also alert us if there are discrepancies or edge cases. In this example, I prompted Parabola and I said I'm investigating any records that didn't get an invoice discrepancy status column, so I want to add a new step and I want to create a new branch where I apply a filter to look for any rows that didn't get a status. Now, in this example, when we click into this step, we can see that we had 0 rows not get a status, so everything worked correctly here. But if there are places where you want to build checks into your flow, now this will automatically send me an email anytime there is any data that exists in this branch. Now that I have that branch set up, I wanted to change it a little bit so I could do a little bit more analysis of some of our bigger discrepancies. So I said to Parabola, let's actually filter for any records where the discrepancy amount is plus or minus 10. When this step was dropped onto the canvas, we can see that there was an error when Parabola placed this step. And now if we open it up, you're going to see if we click Get Help with this issue, Parabola is going to send a message to analyze what's going on in this step. And then after diagnosing it, it will automatically fix the error in that step. Once it has processed, then you can see in this example, we are keeping records where the invoice discrepancy is plus or minus $10. In this case, we didn't have any records, but this is a good approach if you do want to analyze some of those larger variance exception cases that might exist in the data set. Finally, let's talk about the follow the data approach to troubleshooting. Now, if you have a data set that has clear identifiers, a really good approach is to search for that identifier in one step, look at the row of data, and then go back a step, search for that identifier in this step, and see how the data changes step by step. That's a little bit more difficult in practice with the data set that we're looking at here, because all of these records are related to an invoice where the invoice number is the same for all these records. We do have an order number, but when we go downstream, we're removing that value. So let's say, for example's sake, we actually don't have a really good identifier in the data set right now. Well, you can always add your own identifier by asking Parabola to add row numbers in your data set. As you can see, I just asked Parabola to add row numbers in the first column before the calculate invoice discrepancy and status step, so it added a new step here. And if I click in, now we have a row that represents real unique identifiers that we can use to track the data step by step. So if I want to know what happened in row number 78 from one step to the next, I can come in here, search, we're going to look for this specific row. I can then say, hey, I want to look at all of these different columns here. And then we can start to pan through the data and see exactly what happened in that row. The very last tip that I'll mention is that going back to what we spoke about earlier with draft flows versus live flows, if you're ever really scared about breaking a flow as you try to troubleshoot and understand what's going on, you can always create a new draft, so duplicate that version that you were working on into a draft, and there you can safely totally disassemble and reassemble the flow without any fear of consequences. And if you ultimately decide, hey, I don't want to go in this direction, you can always discard the draft that you're working in and create a new one. Or if you solve the problem, you can always publish that draft to replace the live version of your flow. Now that you understand everything from working with parabola tables to shortcuts to navigation tips and now troubleshooting techniques, we'll close with a quick course wrap-up.